Hey, Nikil.
Hey,
Thank you so much, Nikil, for coming on today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think your company, Alchemy, in the blockchain space is super interesting, and obviously you're pretty well known as a serial entrepreneur before that with a really interesting background. So looking forward to getting into some of that. I want to start with early days. I read that you actually got the highest GPA in the history of your high school. So it's like one thing to have the highest GPA in your class, but in the history of the high school is a pretty tall order. What was it like growing up? And as someone who was obviously pretty smart, but also probably worked pretty hard, just what was that experience like?
yeah, thanks for having me, Jake. Really appreciate it. So, I had a very different childhood than I think a lot of my friends who were in college with me. So, I grew up in this super small town called Lubbock, Texas, that most people have never heard of. It's if you take San Francisco, where I live right now, and you invert everything about it, that's basically what Lubbock is. It's super flat. There's no building over 4 stories tall. It's super conservative. Everyone drives like a massive pickup truck. And it was honestly such a great childhood experience. I think when I look at California, there's a ton, kids have like a ton of stress. There's a ton of academic stress. My childhood was just really fun. I spent my summers building bike ramps and jumping my bike off of them, and like playing a lot of video games and swimming and uh, playing street hockey. So I had a really really great time. My high school was also very interesting because it was in a really rough neighborhood, and it was called a magnet school. So basically, 80% of the school was more of the rough neighborhood, and then 20% they had kind of stronger academic program. But even then, like the stronger academics was like not strong at all. But there was about 3 or 4 kids who were some of the best in the state at math and science. And those were the people I really, the 4 or 5 of us would go and do national state science and math competitions. So it was really cool. We had this like really, really, I got along with like everyone in school. It wasn't like we only hung out with ourselves, but kind of academically wise, we had this really cool cohort of people that were driven in the same way. And it was really cool to also see how they spread across the world kind of post high school and post college. But one of the really interesting things for me was coming to college, and at Stanford you see the kids next door to me. So the kid next door to me had like an elevator in his house, and then the kid next door to him had done like computer vision research as like a sophomore in high school, which was not, and he's like an MIT professor now, and it was not like a thing that normal people did back in the day. I think now it's more of a common thing. And then my roommate was 7 feet tall and is in the NBA, right? So I literally remember going back and saying, wow, like everyone's famous except for me in my freshman dorm. And I think also one of the interesting things was seeing how students had just had these amazing prep school experiences. Like the people who went to Andover, went to Exeter, you just came and high school was really hard. And I think college was really easy for a lot of people. And for me, it was not the case. My high school was super easy and I had a lot of fun. And, college was definitely a step up in terms of educational rigor.
That's pretty interesting. Living with an NBA player and having these geniuses across the hall sounds like quite an environment to grow up in. It's no surprise that you later wanted to recreate kind of the freshman dorm feeling with one of your companies, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, you started at Stanford, which was kind of your opening to the outside world. You got your BS and your master's in computer science and AI. Did a lot of interesting things there. What was, you talked about the adjustment of starting at in kind of an easy school where you weren't challenged a whole lot, and you have this small group of smart kids who's, maybe you're challenging yourselves internally. What was that adjustment like at Stanford? And now looking back, what were some of the best memories you have, or some of the most valuable takeaways that you got from going to such an amazing place?
Yeah, great question. So I think first on the adjustment period, it was, it was definitely, the classes were way harder than I was used to, and you had just had to do way more work. But I think one of the really, really interesting things was growing up in a small town, you get this kind of big fish in a small pond feeling, which I think is honestly one of the most important things in life. When I look back at my life, I think there's a couple characteristics which I see in a lot of incredibly successful people, which I try to emulate myself is number one, I think is like confidence. I think when I see the students in Palo Alto, if you go to high school in California, or at least like a very competitive area in California, like the Bay Area, you can't be the best at academics and the best at athletics and the best at music and the best at like kind of student council and social life. But growing up in a small town in Texas, I could be the best at all of those things, and there just wasn't that much competition. And I think what that does is it gives you this inner confidence in yourself that, hey, if I do something, I can be really great at it, and I can be really great at multiple things. So having that confidence from a really early age growing up was super, super, super crucial. And I think that when I look at the people I really admire and look up to, it's really this mix of ultimate confidence in themselves plus ultimate persistence that they're going to keep on going and keep on trying until they get what they want. And I think, I like to think of myself as a very persistent person. So when I came to Stanford, the classes were way harder and everyone had just such much better kind of high school background than me to prepare them for this, but it didn't faze me. It didn't bother me. I knew I could just do it if I just put in the time and effort. So yeah, it was a great experience. And I think ultimately I'm so grateful for my Stanford experience. It was such an amazing time because the single best thing Stanford does, they do a lot of things amazingly well. And the single best thing, in my opinion, is they create a really tight community. So your freshman dorm community is like your family. Like I literally texted my freshman roommate. My freshman roommate like texted me yesterday, right? And this is like how many years? Like 14 years later. So in a lot of my friends from my freshman dorm and through Stanford are like literally like my best friends like since then. I get to work with a lot of them. I see a lot of them pretty frequently, and it's one of those things where just being surrounded by such awesome, genuine, nice, caring people really shaped my college experience and gave me one of the best times of my life. So very, very grateful for that. And I think the palm trees and amazing weather and great academics is all a plus, but really at Stanford, the core of it is just having such an amazing crew of people that you get to have a great journey through college with.
I think that's really interesting, especially the point you made on the kind of combination of confidence and persistence. We've talked just briefly before the show about persistence, and I believe that that's one of the more important elements of success. I've never heard it stated so clearly in combination with confidence, though. It's pretty interesting. And like looking back on my own background, I appreciate that. Growing up and going to a relatively small school, being able to kind of like do pretty well in school, but then also like start on the basketball team. I never could have started at like a school that was any good at basketball or even made the team probably. And it definitely develops a sense of confidence that's useful, I think, later on. How do you think about like now you spent a lot of time in San Francisco, before that a lot of time at Stanford, like you mentioned. Obviously you're surrounded by a number of great, really successful people and entrepreneurs from day one on campus, it sounded like, to probably today and everything you've done in between. How do you continue that confidence and kind of drown out some of the noise of, you can always go on Twitter and see a million people as or more successful, at least in appearance, than you might be or than I might be at least. How do you kind of maintain that confidence and then pair it with the persistence over time?
That's a great question. So I think being in Silicon Valley, you really get exposed to some of the greatest, I would say, I don't want to say the greatest minds. I think definitely some of the greatest minds, but also some of the greatest success stories in history, right? When you think about if you think about over the past 20 years, 20 years ago, what were the major forces that shaped our world, right? It was government, it was religion, countries, like these were the major forces, right? And over the last 20 years, it's been really technology. If you think about Apple or Google or Facebook or Microsoft, right? And these companies have impact billions of people across the planet, more than any religion or any country or any other kind of organization. And I think, and the pace at which they've been created is just stunning, right? And it's been really interesting, like being in Silicon Valley, going to Stanford, like all these companies have just been like, either we know the founders or it's like 1 degree of separation, or like, it's just been really, really fascinating to get a firsthand view of the rise of these companies. And I think one of the really interesting things, it comes with this duality of, there's definitely this aspect of, wow, like they just did such an amazing job. And I think because I'm a very competitive person, so I'm very chill, but I'm also very competitive. Like if we're competing, like I have to win. But if we're not, it's totally chill. So I think for me personally, seeing these successes, it doesn't really, I don't feel intimidated, or I don't feel jealous, because I'm really happy for them, right? And I really love seeing other people succeed and create great things for the world, and always wish them really well. At the same time, I use that as inspiration to say, wow, they're doing such amazing things with my life, with their life. Let me level up, and we should be able to do that. So it's more of and I think Silicon Valley in that way is just very collaborative. It's very like 1+1=3. It's very yes, and let's help each other. And I think that's one of the really great things about the industry as a whole. When you look at, I have friends who are, in, the stereotypical med school, and it's like super competitive, or even like I think finance to a degree. But in tech, it's just a very collaborative, supportive environment. I think I've been very, very happy to be surrounded by amazing people who have spent so much time coaching and mentoring me and Joe and our team. And likewise, I just spoke to a class at Stanford yesterday, and like to pass that on and help out wherever I can.
I think that's a great way to look at it, especially using other people's success, not at all for envy and more so for inspiration. I think it's easier said than done in some degree, but really something worth going for. You mentioned how tech has really driven the world forward in the last 20 years, especially some of the biggest companies behind that. You've worked for brief stints at each, I think, but Facebook, Microsoft, and Google. The other two that you haven't been at, I would say, would be Amazon and Apple. But given the exposure to three of the biggest, most influential tech companies in the world, or companies overall now in the world, I'd be interested in hearing first if you have anything to kind of share about those early experiences. And then second, you probably have a pretty unique perspective, whether you kind of recognize it or have taken the time to think about it or not, on what kind of these companies are like compared and contrasted to one another. And I'm sure there's similarities, but differences as well. So would love to hear your general perspective on that.
Absolutely. So a little bit of backstory here. So I actually never wanted to work at a big company. I always wanted to do startups and work at startups. And I just never found startups that I was like really excited about. I actually, in hindsight, all these stories are funny, right? I remember going to the career fair, and there's this startup. I just wasn't, I'm very idealistic, and I wanted a company that said, hey, we're going to go build something that's going to change the face of the planet. And a lot of the companies, startups that were in the career fair, I think I ended up doing great things. It just, for me personally, weren't that exciting. It was like, I remember a company like my freshman year that like you like split your bill when you went to the restaurant and stuff like that. And I remember there's this one company freshman year, there's this guy who I was walking by the career fair, and a lot of the people at career fair are just staying there at the booth. But this guy like came up to me and he was talking to me. He was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, we're building this thing. It was like, the company was like 6 people at the time. And I was like, wow, this guy's like really, he's like a hustler, and he seems really smart and just kind of like very engaging. Right. And I was like, maybe I should go work there. But then at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? I'm just not that, I don't know, file storage is not that exciting. So this was actually Dropbox when there were 6 people at the time at the career fair. So decided, so funny, I ended up actually not applying to any jobs my freshman year. And after finals spring quarter, ended up flying out to interview at Microsoft and Yahoo. And this is when everyone's already starting their internship. I don't even have a job because I just was playing Frisbee and not applying for jobs. And then ended up getting offers at Microsoft and Yahoo. And at that time, I think my parents really missed me and wanted me to come back. So they were like, oh, you can come like work in your own startup over summer. So I turned down Yahoo and Microsoft. I think I like tried coding for like a day and then just played video games and rode my bike off ramps the rest of the summer. But the next summer is, again, like really wanted to do small companies, ended up doing Facebook, Google, Microsoft, actually in the reverse order, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook. And one of the really interesting things there was during those time periods, people right now in Silicon Valley, like I guess now Microsoft is getting more prominent with, Satya taking over and them doing really well again. But Microsoft was this like massive company that didn't get any airtime in Silicon Valley. And I was a big Microsoft fanboy growing up, but I actually wasn't an Apple fanboy. I was like the only Microsoft fanboy in Silicon Valley. And there's probably like 100 buildings at Microsoft, right? And at Microsoft, all the execs are in building 42. on the fourth floor. And for some random reason, I was on building 42 on the third floor. I was literally under all the exec buildings. So ended up like hanging out with Steve Ballmer when I was there, who had just taken over CEO like 3 days before I started. And I was really mad because I really wanted to meet Bill Gates because and I had ended up like seeing him my freshman year at college, but then I had wanted to hang out with him again at Microsoft. But ended up meeting with Steve Ballmer, ended up getting him come to Stanford and give a talk there, and kind of have seen him over the years. But one of the really cool things the reason I'm telling this story is like it was really cool to get exposure to kind of the leadership at the different companies. So at Google, the same thing happened. It's interesting. They also named their building was also called 42, where all the execs were. And I had, meeting with Larry, and I would hang out with Sergey randomly. And the same thing at Facebook. There's one desk next to Mark, and like that happened to be my desk, right? And just getting exposure, firsthand exposure to these founders was really cool because I learned a few different things. One is they're very ambitious and they're very, the confidence thing we talked about before. But it's really like, I feel like they get a lot of praise for being brilliant, which they 100% are. But I really think the defining characteristic with them is just persistence and work ethic. And it was unreal to see. At this time, Facebook was 2011. So I don't remember the valuation, but it was like I believe it was like above like $15 billion. It was like a fairly big company at the time. It felt very small compared to Facebook and Microsoft, compared to Google and Microsoft. And there was it was funny because at that time, the office was literally 2 blocks from my grad student dorm at Stanford. It was right off of Stanford campus. So I would like go there, and I was just super impressed by the persistence. Mark, I still remember this, like my girlfriend at the time, I went to show the office on a Sunday, and Mark was walking in at like Sunday at like 10 a.m. to go to work. And, he's at this point a multi-billionaire. Like he doesn't have to do this, but he's coming in and I'm the intern, and he's like, hey, what's up? I was like, oh, hi. Like, sorry, I'm not working. I'm just messing around, like giving tours of the office. So I think from that, I got to see firsthand, like really what it takes to build a company like this. And I actually like firmly believe this, I say this pretty frequently, I usually don't say this in podcasts, but I actually think if most people knew what the life was like of a Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, everyone says, oh, it'd be so great to be the richest person on the planet. But I'm willing to bet that if most people actually knew what it took to live those lives, they would not want to do it, right? Like Bill Gates, even if you were guaranteed the outcome, right? Bill Gates said he didn't take a day off in his entire 20s, right? And how many people want to go do that and work those crazy hours? So it was super, super interesting. I think it was like very inspirational. And I think the other thing I realized was they're just normal people. They're, super driven, super motivated, work really hard, very smart. But, I just had this belief that they can do it. Like I can do it, anyone can do it. And I want to try. Oh, and actually really quick, the last part, the short answer for how to compare the cultures, at the time, and I think a lot of it is just with the scale of the company, but to me, Microsoft felt like work, Google felt like grad school, and then Facebook felt like undergrad.
That's really sometimes the most powerful comparisons are just super brief like that. So that's a really interesting take. I'm going to need to reflect on a little bit. But one thing you said at the end that I thought was pretty interesting is like if people could see these people's lives, like Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, Zuckerberg, et cetera, they might not actually want to do what they're doing or be willing to do that. Reminded me of a quote from one of my favorite actors, Jim Carrey. He said something like, I wish everyone could get rich and famous so that they could see that that's not really what they want in the end.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, though, that, we talked about earlier how persistence and confidence is kind of a key combination for success. It sounds like there was certainly, and maybe there's something that, that you did to control your fate a little bit, but it sounds like there was certainly some luck involved in that you kept getting placed in these awesome situations, sitting next to Mark, building 42 at both of these companies where that happens to be the building you want to be in. Do you look at luck as kind of a third factor in all of this? And do you think that, luck is been blind a lot for you, or that you can kind of do things to help things tip in your favor?
I think this is a very Interesting question. I've actually thought about this question a lot. It's like I also feel like it's very like a politically charged question also in terms of how people react to this. I think like, I think Oprah and Mark Andreessen actually have like very interesting takes on this. I think look, on one hand, I'm fortunate beyond measure. I had amazing parents, I have an amazing family, I had a great education growing up. I, was born in America. I had food to eat when I was growing up, and it's just I'm very blessed, like no question about it. And I think on the other hand, I really think like when I study other people and the people, like most of the people, it's really interesting because if you look at like most of my domain is I'm interested in business, so I read a lot about different business people and people like a lot of the great companies that have been created. If you look at most of the really great companies that are created, especially back in the day, right? If you look at the Andrew Carnegie or the Rockefeller or Henry Ford, these kind of people, they all grew up like incredibly poor and like had no opportunities and really rose from that. I think there's a little bit of a myth that anyone, at least in Silicon Valley, anyone who's rich like got really lucky, and for sure it is. By no means am I saying it's equally as hard for everyone. It's for sure easier for some people and for sure harder for a lot of other people. But I think the defining characteristic among people who I've witnessed that have created really great things has been this unrelenting persistence of, if I have an opportunity, I'm going to make the most of it. And if I don't have an opportunity, I'm going to keep trying things until I figure out an opportunity. And when I look at my life, all the times when things have worked out really well, there was usually a lot of effort behind it. That one really interesting thing about this is I think in Silicon Valley, I think just in the world in general, history gets rewritten to kind of make everything seem like an overnight success. So it was just a direct path, and we tried and it just worked out, and it was really great, right? And one of the things that Joe and I, my co-founder and I, always said when we were getting started was we said, look, when one day when we're giving talks and we're telling our story, we're going to tell the whole story, and we want people to know how hard it was and how many years it took and how much like sleepless nights and stress and times when you think that nothing's going to work out. It's not this like linear, like, oh, this hockey stick, we built something and just like blew up. There's one conversation that actually stuck out to me. And I was playing chess with Mark that summer. And I asked him, I was like, Mark, did you know that Facebook was going to be the thing? And he was like, dude, no, like I built like 9 things before Facebook. And even while Facebook was blowing up, we thought this other thing, Wireshark, would be really successful. It's like file sharing thing, right? And that just really struck me, right? And you think about this, how many people do you know who have built and launched 9 products? And if you actually think about that, it's probably like very, very few. Like Bill Gates was one of those, like, Mark Zuckerberg was one of those, like, and even like Evan Spiegel had built a bunch of different things before. And you look at these things and for sure, being in fortunate situations and having good luck like helps a lot. But ultimately, the people who create great things are the ones who do that repeatedly until they find something that works.
So you talk about these really successful people who've started a number of things, Zuckerberg being included on the list. I think you're, if not on the list, making your way to be on the list. You've started a number of projects as an entrepreneur and started a number of companies, even if it's just a weekend of coding to make a consumer app. Would like to talk about a couple of those before getting to what you're working on currently at Alchemy. The first one that I read about, and maybe it wasn't the first in order of ones that you made, but Check Into My Flight, I think it was called, where you basically enabled people to check in kind of automatically to their Southwest flight to get them kind of priority boarding. And then later on, you worked on a company called Down to Lunch, which went really viral. It was actually the #1 social app in the App Store. Would love to hear about those early experiences, wherever you want to kind of start, whatever sounds interesting. But certainly this isn't your first rodeo either, working at Alchemy, and hopefully this is the one that's going to hit big.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is honestly like a perfect story of how, Check Into My Flight was, and I'll tell the story behind that, was probably on the order of magnitude of like 12th or 15, probably between 10 and 15, number 10 and 15 of things I'd built. And 2 or 3 of them before had gotten like fairly popular. not to actually one was more popular than Checking My Flight. We built this like events platform for Stanford that was used at like colleges around the country. It was called Fountain Hop. But the Checking My Flight story is like pretty interesting. So, and the point of saying that also was that this, again, wasn't the first time I tried. I tried a bunch of other things. A lot of things didn't work. And this was the first thing that got even more kind of usage.
Can I ask before we get to check my flights? Kind of interesting. I had no idea that this was, there was a dozen projects before this. We talked about persistence a lot at this point, but I'd like to know how you think about like moving on. So you started these 12 projects, right? And like some of them were more successful than others.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, like you don't want to keep pushing on this idea that's not really gaining traction and you need to move on. How do you think about kind of that, weighing the counterweights of persisting relentlessly versus realizing like, either I don't want to work on this anymore, this is too hard, this isn't going to work, etc.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll answer that in two parts. So the first part is in the previous projects that I had built, I actually didn't run into that problem because most of them I actually built, but then I only actually launched a couple of them. And the ones that I did launch, like actually ended up being most of them, two of them ended up being like fairly popular. One I ended up not like pushing it because these projects weren't like, hey, I'm going to build a company. Like these were just like, oh, I just built fun things. So I didn't see the success criteria as a bunch of people using it. It was more just like, I just wanted to build it. So it was like a different metric of what the outcome I wanted was. In that second question of like, how do you know if you're pushing it or if you should continue pushing it or not? And I think this is more in the context of starting a company or building a product that people actually want. This is like a much longer question, this is honestly like a whole talk in itself, but I'll share like a couple quick thoughts on this because I think it's really important. So I believe his name is Peter, I forgot his name, from Segment had a really great talk on this. And the question is really, do you have product market fit or not? And so the first thing I would say when you're building a new product is if you're building, let's just focus on consumer social right now. Like you're building an app that you want to use. The most important thing is like, can you build something that you actually want to use? And most of the products that were like, almost every product I've built that has been very widely used has been something that I felt that I needed because when you do that, you have a concrete use case. You're building for a customer that exists. Even if there's a small user base, at least you want it. And exactly, you're very, very kind of like in tune with the problem and the challenges and how the solutions should work. So it's like the classic thing of like, if you look at, again, like the Google, the Facebook, the Snapchat, all these were built, the Instagram, not so much Instagram, but all the other ones were built to solve a problem that like the founders like themselves had. And I think that is the ultimate way to do it if you can. Then the question is, and I think another thing is when you're building products, as much as possible. So if you don't do that approach, if you're like, hey, I want to go build something that, I think other people need. One of the most important things is you don't want to build anything. You just want to like validate the idea as much as you can beforehand. Like, so one of the products we built, we ended up selling $500,000 of software without really writing any code. And that really helped us see if there was market demand or not. And I think over and over, you see companies that try a bunch of things, they try building a bunch of things and they find out no one wants to use it. And the benefit of not building anything is you can iterate much faster. Right. And I think the last part about product market fit and when you're trying to find product market fit, the most important thing is your iteration speed and the user feedback. So the tighter, which I can talk a little bit about how we did down the launch, but the tighter you are on user feedback and iteration speed, the faster you can get to your product that actually has product market fit. And I think back to the original thing I was saying about Segment, they had a really great talk about product market fit. And I think this was actually spot on, where Peter said, product market fit is like you're rolling this boulder up a hill and you're pushing, it's really hard. And then suddenly it flips. You hit the top of the hill and it just starts going down on its own. And you start getting like, and it's like you feel this pull where people want your product. They're just signing up, they're sharing with friends, they're telling people about it, they want to use it. And it just totally changes. And you will know when you have product market fit. And if you don't know, it means you don't have it. And that actually turned out to be 100% true, because we were always like, well, do people want this? They kind of want it, they a little bit, like maybe we're just on the right place, maybe we're out of time, like all these different things. And then when we built products that had really good product market fit, it was just like, our database is crashing every day because our user base is doubling. And even if you don't have that crazy growth, it's people really, really, really want your stuff, and that you have product market fit. So I think that's a little bit of the context on that, and happy to dive in there. But what was I forgot the original question now.
No worries. That was super useful to hear. The original question, I think you were going to talk about your experience with checking my flight or down to lunch.
Absolutely. So checking my flight was an interesting story. So I actually, so we would always fly Southwest, and so for those of you who haven't flown Southwest, it's awesome airline. They basically don't have assigned seating. You just go, and then 24 hours beforehand, you check into your flight, and you get assigned, you get to board in an order. So there's like A, B, and C, and you can board in order A1 through 60, B1 through 60, C1 through 60. You board in order that you signed up on the website that you checked in. So if you check in right at the exact time, maybe you'll get A20. And then if you wait an hour or two, you'll get like B30. So it's like you can get on the plane and choose your seat earlier. So my mom would always check into the flight for me, and she would call me every time, and she'd say like, oh, you need to check in. I remember I think I was in undergrad, or I think I was in grad school. So I was going to visit my sister. My sister was at Wharton at the time, undergrad, and I was going to visit her. My mom calls me and said, look, you're growing up, you need to check into your own flight. And I basically was like, Mom, I don't care. Like, I don't care where I sit. I'm the guy who will just like, I want to be on the plane as little as possible. So I will just grab the burrito, and I will, be the last one to board, even if I have an earlier boarding seat. Cause I was like, I don't care where I sit. So she kept on calling me and be like, oh, you need to check in your flight. And I was like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, my mom keep calling me. So I landed in Philly to go visit my sister, and we were going to this party, and she was like, oh, I'm going to take a nap. So I know 0 people at Penn at this point, right? And she lives in this house. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do for the next hour while she's taking a nap, right? So I just sit down, and I was like, man, it's super annoying that my mom keeps on calling me to check into the flight. I was like, I'm sure I could just automate this, right? I could just automate it. So I actually sat there and bought a ticket. You had to buy a ticket. So I bought a ticket to automate this flight, and you can actually refund. That's one of the nice things about Southwest. You can just buy a ticket and refund it. So I bought a ticket, wrote a program that crawled all the Southwest website, and kind of it's not even hacking. It just basically pretends like you're a user and goes through the whole flow and signs you in and checks in your flight. And it actually worked. I think it was 40 minutes, and it actually ended up working. So we built it, and then closed my computer, went to the party, and I honestly just completely forgot about it for about, so that was Thanksgiving. So I really just forgot about it till next summer. And then I graduated, and I was like, oh, I'm going to start this company. But before I do that, let me just finish up a bunch of projects, right? And I've seen this Southwest. Oh, actually, sorry. Over Christmas break, I think I went home and I was like, oh, I have a little bit of time. I remember that Southwest thing I built. Let me just put it on a website so I can actually use it. And I had written all the code for it. And so then I go back over the next summer, and I was like, oh, I have all these projects that I should actually just finish and put up. Because one thing that I used to do was just write up code stuff, but I never would launch it. And I think most of the value of building a product is actually from launching it, because that's where all the lessons come in about users and growing it and seeing user feedback, all of those things. And actually, it was funny because I couldn't find my code. I was like, I'm pretty sure, I didn't even remember at this point. I was like, I'm pretty sure I wrote this code to do this, because I have a database and all the data's in here, but I can't find any of the code. It was really weird. So I ended up actually rewriting the whole thing from scratch. And after I rewrote it, I was like, oh, wow, I found this other folder where the code was in. So the funny thing is, so I launched it, and I literally thought, again, this is one of those things where to be honest, it's actually really hard to predict. There's a few things that I've predicted, hey, I think this thing is going to go really viral. I can just tell. This one, I literally had no clue. I was like, I think one of the fallacies that is at least definitely prevalent for me, for sure, is I generally, up till recently, I realized this, but I generally think that people think and act the same way as me, which is not true at all. So at this point, my mental model of the world is no one really cares about checking in. And it's just a kind of fun website I built for fun. Turns out that people are fanatical about checking in. Like they will set their alarm and wake up at like early in the morning, late at night to check in just to make sure they get A10 or A15 instead of A25, right? And I just didn't care. So I totally underestimated how many people actually cared about this. So what happened was I posted on my Facebook. I think I posted on like Hacker News or something. I don't remember. Like I posted like one or two places, and it actually ended up getting a lot of attention. And this wasn't something. There's definitely been a lot of products that we tried like promoting and stuff. This one I actually didn't try promoting, and I think just by the nature of being a really simple utility that people wanted, it ended up blowing up. Like it was featured in all these like blogs and newspapers, or sorry, actually this is before. It was just featured in a few different blogs and stuff. I actually learned a really interesting side note about marketing at this time. So at the time, Hacker News, I think, sent like 5,000 page views, which, you know, again, this wasn't a lot. Like looking at products later, we had millions of people. But for me, like one of the first things I built, it's like, you know, 5,000 people checked out the site in like a few hours. I was like, that's pretty cool. But only like, and out of that 5,000, about I think there were like 800 signups or something like that, where people actually put in their flight info. And at this time, this was crazy because I had all their flight info. Like I could cancel their flights if I wanted to. Like obviously I didn't, but and then there was this Southwest Airlines blog that actually had it was about traveling, and it wasn't Southwest. It was like a travel blog. And from that, I had 800 people visit the site, and I actually had 1,000 flights put in. So that was super fascinating to me because what I realized was like general marketing is not really like targeted marketing is way more valuable than general marketing because Hacker News, 5,000 people visited, 800 flights went in. This random blog, 800 people visited, 1,000 flights went in. That means like a quarter of the people or 20% of the people put in more than one flight, right? Which is pretty wild. So anyway, long story short with this, Southwest finds out, I don't know how they find out because it started getting attention. It turns out like, so they had a competing product where people could pay for something similar. It wasn't exactly the same. You got A1 through 15, but they were basically like, oh, like we want to charge people for this. And so they sent me a cease and desist letter and they're like, you need to shut this down. And my parents freaked out. They're like, you have to shut this down. You can't get sued. This is going to be so bad. Like they like freaked out. I was like, it's going to be fine. They're like, no, you need to shut this down. So I emailed Southwest. They're like, you have to shut this down. And I emailed them saying, okay, I'll shut it down, but I want to meet your CEO and I want to get lunch with him. And then they said no. And I was like, okay, I'll shut it down. so that was ended up shutting down. And then the funny part was my roommate at the time, this is the last bit of the story. And this is again, back going to show that, you know, this wasn't all just like complete accident and just like blow up. But my roommate at the time was this guy, Chris Peach, who's an awesome dude, who's actually a professor at Stanford now. We lived in these two houses outside a block away from campus, which actually was interesting because Yahoo and Stripe were started out of the house that we lived in. And Jerry's one of our investors now. You know, I met John when he came back to pick up all his stuff, but so it was interesting to see that. But Chris was like, dude, you should get some attention on this. You should get some press. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, it's super interesting. You should do it. And I was like, okay, I've never really done that before. We'd been a little press before, but it had always been kind of inbound. So I actually stayed up that night and emailed about probably like 25 different journalists and, you know, just different newspapers, different stuff. And it was really interesting because at this time, so no one responded except for two people. One of them was the basically most famous person. I think it was Walt Mossberg. He was like one of the top like technology journalists because I'd written a really personal email to him and he was like, oh, this is awesome. And then he assigned it to someone else. He's like, oh, this person will cover it. And then that person never ever responded. So I was like, okay, whatever. And then the most famous and the least famous, this website called Palo Alto Online. I thought this was a joke, actually. It looked like it was like a scam website that was going to send me some Viagra or something like that, right? It was like, it had all these ads. It was like, you know, not to like trash talk them, but it had all these ads, all these things. They came and they're like, hey, we want to do a story. It's really interesting. I was like, okay, cool. So I went in, did the story with them. I had no idea that all of these big newspapers use paloaltoonline.com as their source for kind of like news around Stanford and Silicon Valley and tech. literally the next day, I'm sleeping and I wake up in the morning. I get a call. I like silence it, put it under my pillow, and then I get another call. It calls again. I was like, oh, okay, I should probably get up. It's like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. I, I answer. I'm like, hello. They're like, hey, this is NBC. We're here to do a video, put you on TV, and we're at Stanford. I was like, what? And I was like, I don't live at Stanford. They're like, where do you live? Because I had moved off campus like a month before. And they were like, or a couple months before, they said, gave my address, and they're like, great, we'll be there in 5 minutes. I was like, I'm still in my pajamas. Like, what is going on? So anyway, so like they roll in with their camera crew and like do this whole thing. And it kind of blew up from there. But it was just kind of this interesting story that, again, was not intended to be a company. It was not intended to be anything real. It was just this random side project that we did that was kind of cool and really struck a chord with people. And the last thing I'll say about this, and then we can move on, is, I think this I used to be really into cars. I used to street race in high school and mod cars and like build computers and stuff. And I think I used to be really into things. And one of the big kind of major shifts that happened to me for my life was when I really had the ability to code and create things. There's a shift where building things was never like buying things stopped being interesting to me, and really the ability to create was the most amazing magical thing for me, right? So through the journey of building all these different companies and different products, we've been in a lot of press, had a lot of famous people approach us, raise a lot of money, like all these different things, and that's fine, and it's whatever. But literally the best feeling, and this is just a personal thing, literally the best feeling in the world for me is building something and having someone say, yo, that made my life a lot better, and thank you for that. That not even life, that made my day better, like thank you, right? And I still remember the Southwest check-in. There was this girl who had Ellie, who had gone to high school with my sister. She had gone to high school with me and my sister. I like didn't really know her super well, but her husband had seen it on Facebook and had used it. And he messaged, like the day we launched the Southwest, and he messaged me being like, hey man, this is really awesome. Like it's super helpful for me and like saves me a bunch of time. Like, thank you for making this. And that to me, out of all the stuff in the check-in of my flight, like we're probably in like 20, 30 press articles, like, on TV, all these things. The people who messaged me and said, hey, this made my day better, and this, thank you so much for this, that was by far 100x the best part, the most satisfying, the most exciting. And that's why I built stuff.
It's a crazy story, and I appreciate you sharing it fully transparently. It's certainly an interesting journey you've taken, and this sounds like it was the start of a number of projects to come and the result of a number of projects before it. I do want to get to what you're working on now, because it's in an area that I'm super interested in, which is the general crypto space. And you talk about, wanting to improve the lives of a lot of people, or just the days of a lot of people. Your goal is super big, to basically bring blockchain to billions of people. You even mentioned earlier, like looking for internships, you wanted to work on something that was potentially massive, and I think you found your thing. So would love to hear your general introduction for those who are totally unfamiliar as to what Alchemy is, and talk about a bit of the story there.
Absolutely. So I think, yeah, okay. So I'm trying to figure out where to start, because this is a long story, but condensing it down, the crux of this is when I think about, okay, so kind of backing up, how do I think about my life? So you have one shot at life, right? You get one chance to really have a big impact, religion, reincarnation aside, like you're not going to be back here again. So why not try to like have a big impact? That was kind of my philosophy growing up, right? And after college. So the way to think about impact is on two axes. Like, and the thought process is just generally, why not try to hit a home run? Like, why not try to impact and improve life for as many people across the world as you can? And I think for me, I measure impact on two axes. So your x-axis is how many people's lives do you touch? And your y-axis is how deeply do you impact those lives on a daily basis, right? And like how much benefit do you bring? The x-axis was super obvious to me. Like, never before in human history, we touched on this a little bit earlier, never before in human history could I press buttons on this magic metal box and build something that improved life for people across the planet, right? Like, that is crazy. That is like absolutely insane. Like, if you told someone 50 years ago that that would be possible, they would just, you'd be in like a psycho ward, right? But the idea is that software, technology, computers, the internet, these enable us to massively expand our impact and really build products that can scale really quickly. And computer science, it's what I loved, it's what I was really good at, and it's what I just wanted to do. So that to me was a no-brainer. Then the question, the y-axis is like, how do you really bring positive, massive impact to people's lives? And one of the things that really struck me, so we were working on this idea of community with Down the Lunch, and I thought I still feel that's really important. And when we saw crypto really take off, the idea was that, over the last 50 years, there have been three major shifts in technology, right? First there was a computer, then there was the internet, and now there's blockchain. And it's still the very early days of blockchain, but it's really interesting talking to people who were there through the computer revolution, the internet revolution. A lot of our investors like to turn over to Google, and he was kind of one of the pioneers of the computer industry, and now had seen it through Google, the internet through Google. Just seeing the parallels between these three industries is super fascinating because they're developing in a very similar way. And what we saw was, the industry is actually formed with a similar three-tier structure. So let's just take the computer. At the bottom layer, what is the fundamental piece of a computer, right? It's your hardware, your protocol, right? So it's your RAM, your hard drive, your CPU, the components that are physically make up the computer. But in the early days, a computer was just a fancy typewriter. You couldn't do anything. It was just kind of, you could have this terminal and you could write code. And if you're an engineer, you could do stuff, but other normal people couldn't do things. So what needed to happen was this, the hardware is the bottom layer. The top layer is actually this, think of it almost like a hamburger, right? The top bun is the software that is user applications. So think Microsoft Word, Excel, Chrome, like these kind of applications. That's how we interact with computers today, right? But the thing that the invisible layer that people don't realize is, in order for that to happen, you have to make it really easy to build, for developers and engineers to build those products for the underlying hardware layer. So the kind of innovation that enabled that to happen was the operating system. So Windows, Mac OS, for the mobile phone, iOS. And what that does is it actually abstracts away the underlying hardware and makes it extremely easy for developers to build applications on top of that underlying hardware. So what you see is now you have hardware that developers couldn't build applications for before, but now you have this kind of operating system abstraction layer that makes it really easy for people to build applications. So now developers come and say, hey, we're going to build something that lets people write a Word document. We're going to build something that lets people do spreadsheets. So now your users come and say, hey, now I can do all these cool things with a computer. This is awesome. I'm going to buy one. So then what happens? You have this virtuous cycle where now developers see, oh, wow, there's a bunch of people using what I built. There's a big market. And so let's build more things. And then more users come because there's more apps and so on and so forth. So you get this kind of like virtuous cycle. So with the internet, you see a very similar pattern, right? You see the bottom layer is the protocol layer. So it's HTTP, FTP. So if you're not familiar with these, for those of you listening, think of these as like the pipes that run the internet. These are the core technologies that the internet is built on. But what is the internet today for us, right? It's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's Google, like these kind of products, right? And to build those products, what do you need? You need the web browser. The web browser is that abstraction layer, that kind of middle layer that abstracts away the underlying protocols and enables developers to build these products, like the Facebook, the Google, YouTube. So with blockchain and crypto, we see a similar thing. You see Bitcoin, you have Ethereum, you have these different chains. And the challenge is, how do you make it easy for developers to build applications, right? And the applications in crypto can be anything from, a Coinbase that lets you buy, a Coinbase or Robinhood that lets you buy and sell crypto, a Goldman Sachs that's using crypto for financial applications, a Walmart that's using crypto for supply chain, a CryptoKitties, which is using crypto to make games on the blockchain. So it's a whole range of different things. And what Alchemy is doing is being that that developer platform layer, like Microsoft did, and Microsoft and Apple did with the operating system, like browsers do for the web. Alchemy is providing that developer platform layer for people to build applications on top of the underlying hardware. And when I say hardware, it's in quotes because it's actually like the Bitcoin, Ethereum. And what that does is open the industry for people to actually build great products and users to come use them. And the last thing I would say, there's two really interesting facets, right? Like when you think about all of this, and this is a little bit difficult to understand without a diagram. I usually draw this out and it becomes a lot more clear. Think of it as kind of this 9-grid, 3x3 grid where you have the applications at the top, the developer platform layer at the middle, and the protocol at the bottom. So one really interesting thing is all of the stuff we're talking about is just technology, right? Like that's just one industry out of many in the world. There's many, many industries. And after that, let's just zoom into the computer. Computer is one slice of one industry, right? And then the operating system is one tiny sliver of one slice of one industry. But like when you look at the largest companies in the world, right? Like Microsoft and Apple, and arguably Amazon with their AWS is also developer infrastructure. Those are three of the largest companies. Three out of usually they're in the top 3 or to 5 companies in the world, and it just shows you how powerful this platform is, because what it does is it enables you to take advantage of this new shift in technology, and as a result, those companies that provide that are able to have massive positive impact on the world and truly become massive through that contribution. So I think when we think about Alchemy, what our goal is we want to build products that enable developers to create great applications for users. So we want to be this substrate layer that people build on top of and bring blockchain to the world.
That's a great introduction. I think I've heard a quote from you in the past that I want to repeat because it's pretty interesting analogy. I think you said that people are trying to basically build skyscrapers on top of Ethereum using picks and shovels, and you guys are giving them the appropriate tools to go and build those big things. And I think it's, the way that you frame it, it seems like something that was inevitable and should seem obvious to a lot of people, but obviously you guys, it might not have been, and you guys stepped in and solved the problem or are solving the problem. And now you have about 70%, as I understand, of people who are building on top of Ethereum or using Alchemy to do it. Totally international, almost every country in the world. How have you come to dominate this space that seems like, to your point, like this is the space that made Amazon, maybe not made Amazon, but has increased Amazon value by a great amount and pretty much made Apple and Microsoft. How have you guys really just come to totally dominate it to date?
That's a great question. So I think a couple things. One also interesting note is in the early days, this goes back to, for those of you looking to start a company, there's always a question of, do you make something that's, there's kind of two axes. Something can be valuable to a few people or it can be valuable to a lot of people. And then that's the x-axis. And the y-axis is it can either be extremely valuable or not that valuable, right? So typically you have to choose, either you build something that's extremely valuable to a small set of people, or you build something that's kind of valuable to a lot of people. And because the reality is there's not going to be some opportunity where something is extremely valuable to a lot of people and no one's ever done it, right? Because if that was true, like a Google or Facebook or someone else would have done it. So the interesting thing is like, why was Microsoft and Apple able to build such dominant platforms? Because there were a lot, when it's difficult to understand now, but IBM was such a dominant company. Like IBM was like the computer company and technology company. And why was Microsoft able to come in and do this? And the answer was that in that legendary deal that Bill Gates did was IBM did not think that computers were going to be personal computers were going to be a big market in the sense of like everyone using their own computer. They thought it was just going to be a business thing and you're going to work and use it. And it looked like a really small opportunity at the time, but Bill Gates had the vision to say, no, this is going to be massive. And we want a cut of the revenue of every computer that's sold with Windows, right? And which is considered like one of the greatest like business deals of all time. And when you think about blockchain, we're in a similar state right now where The reason that the Facebook, the Google, the Amazon, the Microsoft don't do this right now is because the market looks really small. It looks like, hey, this is just this little niche thing. It's just blockchain. It's not like $1 trillion industry right now. So, why should we spend time in it? But the interesting thing is, because we're here early and because Microsoft was there early, by the time IBM realized that it was a big thing, it was too late. Like Microsoft had complete dominance over everything. And I think the same thing with Alchemy in the early days. We took a very different approach from most other crypto companies. We're almost all engineers. We had a very small team compared to kind of our impact. We had a company come and try to acquire us, and at the time we were 6 people or 7 people. And I asked them, I was like, why don't you try to buy this other company that's 90 people? And they said, well, you guys have like way more output and way more, ability to execute. And I was like, yeah, good job that you realize that. The team is like extremely, extremely, extremely talented. I think it is the best, everyone says this, but it's the best caliber of people that I've ever worked with. And they've a lot of friends from Stanford, a lot of people, a lot of former founders who've built really great companies. And we had hired 6 recruiting firms and they all said, you guys are literally the most picky people we've ever seen. So we basically, I think there was a couple of things that we did really well that enabled us to kind of get to where we are now. And again, it was many years of doing this. It wasn't like, oh, we just had this idea and we just did it and it was like overnight success, right? We really, really, really focus on building a great product and making sure customers love the product. And almost everyone on the team, till recently, everyone on the team was an engineer. We just built product. We didn't do any marketing. We didn't have any press. We literally didn't, it was just, and I think we rotated too much in that extreme. Actually, I think we could have grown a lot faster if we had been a little more public about it. We were just laser focused on making sure every customer had a really great experience. And one of the things that we did was, when you think about different levels of product, right? There is enterprise, which is typically the slowest moving of the group. Then there's consumer, and consumer, moves a little bit faster. And then there's consumer social, which moves really fast. And then when we were doing our consumer apps, we actually found ways. Most companies like ship an app every couple of weeks or a month or something. We found ways to iterate on a product where we would actually go to Berkeley, dress up as students, and build new versions of the app in real time while we were talking to our users. So we cut our iteration time down from like a month to like 3 minutes, right? So the key for us was, how do we stay in touch with our users and how do we really increase our iteration speed? And we took all of those lessons to building like developer tools and blockchain software. And it turns out that the industry just moves like slower than consumer social. So we basically were able to out execute people just because of the pace at which we executed. A couple other things we did, which was, one of our secret sauces, is every single customer that we have has a real-time chat with our core engineering team, with all the engineers team. And we did 24/7 customer support for every single customer. Like literally Joe and I would my co-founder and I would do the customer support. Like I remember we lived together for 5 years and I was actually we were moving apartments, and we were driving the U-Haul. I was driving the U-Haul, and with all my stuff, it was like 1 a.m. And we had one of our customers in Vietnam had asked us a question and we were answering, and I was like, 1 sec, I'm driving. And I like shoot him a selfie of like us driving the U-Haul. And he was like, oh no, this isn't important. Like it can wait till tomorrow. I was like, no, like I have to help you right now. And like Joe's like moving my furniture and I'm like responding to this customer support thing. And it was just like and they were joking. They're like, hey, we want to use this photo of you on our website. but one of the really cool things about this is it enabled us to get really, and there's so many times, like, I've woken up Joe at like 4 a.m. to like answer a customer request, even if they're not urgent, because we're just like, look, like, we want to really provide a great experience to our customers. And one of the flip sides of this is we had really, really, really amazing user feedback. And this also goes back to our Down to Lunch days, right? Where we built this app, ended up being the #1 app in the App Store, millions of people around the world. Like the New York Times did this front page cover story. I asked them at the time I was single, and I was like, hey, like, the only thing I ask is make me look good. And then they picked a photo of like the food falling out of my mouth and put it on the front page of the New York Times. So it was interesting. But what we did is we put our phone number in the app, and you can actually text us. Anybody in the app could text us. And so as a result, the early days, we get a couple of friends texting us, and then there's a few more. And then we started getting like 5,000 plus text messages a day. We actually broke iMessage and had to email Tim Cook for help. And he had to help us like like literally we found out we were one of the top 10 iMessage users in the world and got more texts than Justin Bieber, right? And it was crazy. And the lessons we took from that were we had, again, we had built at this time probably like Joe and I together had built probably like 14 different products, and I had built probably another 20 more on the side myself before that, like going from college. So we had taken all these lessons from building infrastructure, building consumer products, and just and being in touch with our users. And with the down the lunch days, there were days where I would just spend 10 hours a day texting our users. So we took all of those lessons, wrapped them into this, spent many, many years just heads down focused on making sure we built something that people loved. And it turned out that people loved it. So I think now we're in a phase where we power, $7.5 billion plus of transactions. I think that's our latest public number annually in, like you said, all the country, 99% of countries in the world. So it's been a really, really cool thing to build something that people love. And don't get me wrong, it's still the early days. I think Jeff Bezos has a great quote on this. It's always day one. And at Facebook, it was always this, we're 1% there of the journey. So I definitely feel like we definitely have that mentality internally. And at the same time, it's also really cool. Again, I said this before, but one of the driving forces of our company is, the press and the investors and celebs and all this stuff. That's fun and that's nice. But really the things that we celebrate are when our customers tell us, which now happens really frequently, that, we love. I just this morning, we had a little feedback button in our website, and anybody can sign and respond and give feedback. And one of the feedbacks we got this morning was, the prompt was, the most useful page in Alchemy is, and the guy responded, the whole damn thing. This is epic. Very well done. And that is the stuff that drives us, because we just really want to make stuff that makes our developers' lives easier.
That's awesome. I think it's really interesting the way you posed the opportunity being kind of too small, like Microsoft and Apple in the early days. They're chasing something that seemed too small, and now it's blockchain to some of the larger leading technology companies and incumbents or financial companies, whatever it might be. And then it sounds like once you guys found that niche and focused on it and decided to commit to it, you had these advantages that kind of accumulated over time from your experience with these consumer apps. You got really, really, exceptional at iterating upon customer feedback. And then separately from that, you kept a team of like really productive builders. And obviously your product is no longer for the consumers, it's for builders. So it's kind of like a builders for builders thing. And you guys are kind of taking the best of both worlds and giving people exactly what they want. One thing that I want to cover before we wrap up here, I do want to address your investor list. It's one of the crazier ones that I've seen. You've got everyone from Jay-Z to Charles Schwab, Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman. The list just goes on and on. Naval Ravikant, Balaji Srinivasan, Jerry Yang, you mentioned earlier from Yahoo, bunch of just really Google chairman. It just is crazy. And I've also heard you talk about, though, how you have a pretty high floor for what you want from your investors in terms of like a personal relationship. And so how do you navigate this crazy list of investors? First of all, how did it come to be in the first place? Or did it kind of just stack over time? And then would love to hear, given the personalities involved, just some of the things that you might have learned from one or two of these big names.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was actually a really interesting situation, because we've actually never gone out to raise money. We've always run super, super, super lean. And as a result, never needed money. It's always been kind of inbound in terms of money. So for example, the first several years, we didn't take salary, and then next years took like 30K, and then it was like 70K. And it was just, now I probably make as much as a new grad going to Facebook, and I'm like, I'm rich. And everyone's like, no, you're not. You're so poor. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Compared to zero, like this is so much money. Like you're making as much as like a new grad, and you're like, how many years out of college? But anyway, the result of it was we never had to raise money, and it was always inbound. And when these products were doing well, a lot of people reached out and they said, hey, come, we want to give you money. And the answer for us is always like, no, we're like building. We don't want to talk. We don't need money. And it's also like, the company is going to be really valuable. We don't want to sell pieces of it. If you want to just give us money, that's great. But like, if you want part of our company in return in terms of equity, then, this is really valuable. And a few of our friends, some of our friends were like, dude, look, like these people will be really great mentors. just please talk to them. Like, please take a little bit of time. And we were just like, dude, we're like so focused on building product. Like, we haven't left our apartment 6 days. Like, our app is blowing up, and 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 they're like, okay, look, we'll just line up a bunch of these meetings. Like, just go talk to people. So we went and talked to them, and on the spot, everyone was kind of like, hey, can we write you checks? And what we said was like, look, like, we don't need cash, and we don't actually want cash, but you guys, we were like, oh wow, they're really smart, they're really cool, they're really helpful. And we said, look, we want mentors and we want coaches. And if you're interested in doing that, in return, we'll let you invest in the company. So what we did is we set up a very interesting structure. So first, we mandated that it had to be personal money, which is actually a huge problem for a lot of these people because they invest in funds and they're not allowed to invest personally. Because imagine if you give like, XYZ venture fund a bunch of money. If you're investing in the venture fund and that partner there goes and just invests personally and invests in Facebook and they blow up and that partner makes a bunch of money, but then you don't get any money from returns because you invested in the venture fund, right? So they have this rule that they're not allowed to invest personally. So we actually said, well, we don't want venture fund money. We only want personal money. So they had to go to their limited partners and say, look, like, this company is really hot. This is the only chance we have to build a relationship with them. And we have to do personal money. So we need to make an exception. So most of the people who invested, like, it was like one of the, some write personal checks, but a lot of them, it was like one of the only times they'd ever done a personal check. So like, for example, I think Jay-Z, like, I think we're the only tech company he's invested in personally. He has a venture fund, he does a couple through there, but so we actually said, look, we want this relationship where we will text you, we will call you, we'll email you at kind of like any time, and we want you to respond. So basically, and they said, great, that sounds awesome. So we basically, it was, and at the time, I didn't know this was rare. A lot of these things are. I grew up in a small town. Like, I just didn't know a lot of these things. I didn't know you were supposed to talk to like the assistant's assistant, and they would schedule. They would answer questions, and if you needed to talk to them, you talk to them once every like 5 years or something like that, right? So I just didn't know that was the way it was run. So I was just like, yeah, I want to be able to text you. I want to be able to call you, and like all of our investors, we text, and that's the way that I don't really like email. I don't like scheduling all this stuff, so I just text them, right? And some of them we Snapchat, some of them we Facebook message, whatever, right? So and also it was really interesting because we had a bunch more people approach us that we actually said no to. And again, not out of arrogance, more just we just wanted to focus on building product. And all these things are like great, but ultimately at the end of the day, our users are the people who are our livelihood and who we're here to serve. So that's our laser focus. On the flip side, for example, the Jay-Z story was Jay-Z really wanted to talk to us, and Joe and I literally listened to Taylor Swift and One Direction and stuff. So we had never listened to rap music. I know you do a little bit of rapping. We never listened to rap music. And they're like, hey, Jay-Z really wants to talk to you. I'm like, we don't really have time. Like and this is when one of the apps we're building was like blowing up. It was like we hadn't left our apartment in 6 days in a row. We're like, sorry, we're just like really swamped, and we need to make sure our users can use our product because the site was just going down because it was growing so fast. And they're like, no, he really wants to talk to you. And they and they're like, just take a call. We're like, okay, fine. Like, look, we had said no a couple times, and they're like, okay. They're like, look, you don't have any media or entertainment people. Like, just do it. And we're like, okay, fine. So we're like, okay, we'll talk to him tomorrow at dinner time, because we always do kind of like an interview with them. We usually meet people in person. He was actually in Florida at the time, so it was the day after Beyonce like launched her Lemonade album. So and they're like, he can't be on the phone because he can't talk to you because they're traveling. And I was like, okay, you know what, that's totally cool, because they're on the tour for the album. And I was like, that's totally cool. Yeah, don't worry about it. Like, maybe he can come in next round or whatever. And they're like, no. So I get this call the next day. It's like Jay-Z, and he's on the phone, and he's like, to eat my dinner really quickly to talk to you guys. And we're talking. So we actually, and I know this sounds kind of ludicrous right now, but we actually, again, we want to surround ourselves with really awesome people. And it's not about the name brand for us. It's really about, can we learn from them? Are they good people? Are they going to spend the time? So we interview everyone. So we interviewed Jay-Z for like an hour, and a lot of this was my ignorance of asking like, oh, I know you do music stuff. Like, what else do you do? Like, what do you want to do long-term? Like, are you excited about mentoring us? And I was, to be quite frank, I was very impressed. Super nice guy, super, just really like, you could tell he thought about life in an interesting way, and was just very, very genuine. And I really liked him, and I was like, all right, let's do it. So we brought him on, and I think it was a very similar conversation with a lot of these people. And I think one of the really, I touched on this earlier, but one of the really amazing things is all these people who are just like incredibly successful are just so willing to give back and help. And I just feel so lucky to be around a environment where people are so supportive and so helpful. And I think one of the things for us, again, I just want to emphasize, it's not about like the big names or the brand names, or like, Charles Schwab doesn't really invest in it was funny, we actually lived in the same freshman dorm. He lived in there was a freshman, I lived there when I was a senior, but he lived there the very first year that the dorm was built. I lived there, I don't know, like 50 years later or something. But just so impressed by him, because he's like 80 something, still super sharp, super smart, goes in the office every day, and just like hustles really hard. And he doesn't need to work. He's worth like, I don't know, $15 billion, but he's still like really, really sharp dude and really nice. And same thing with, John Hennessy, who's chairman of the board at Google. He had been the president of Stanford, and he'd been someone I always like really looked up to, because, I credited him with in a large way, bringing Stanford in really like he was one of the founding fathers of like the modern computer chip. And he basically like brought Stanford into the era of technology. And I think that all these people we are so grateful for, and really just so amazed by, in terms of the knowledge that they have and the experience they're willing to share and the time that they spend with us. And I think like one of the things, like I'll email John Hennessy and I was like, hey, every time I email him, like, hey, do you have a quick second to talk? He will call me within 40 seconds. And I was just like, I'm almost like, wow, like this is amazing. So again, just want to say how grateful and how this is a time when I feel very, very, very fortunate to have these people excited about our company and wanting to be a part of it. So yeah, it's been really cool journey. And I think one of the other things I would add to this is the people, one of the best things about the journey has been the people we've been fortunate to surround ourselves with. And, our team is our family to us. Joe and I feel so grateful every single day that these people could do literally anything they want in the world. And they all chose to spend their time with us. And we take that very seriously and very, very, very grateful for that. So, and for those people like kind of follow my Instagram, it's like, they know how much fun we have. We have a great time. It doesn't even feel like we're working. And that's the best part of the startup, where I get to build something that I get to work with people I truly love and enjoy being around every single day. A lot of them were just like buddies from college, and it feels like we're kind of hanging out in college again, except we get to build something that hopefully improves life for people around the planet and brings in this new technology, which hopefully, jury's still out, still early, but we believe, and we're spending our time to do it, that it will be pretty transformational. So it's been quite a journey and a lot of fun.
That's awesome. It's really cool to hear the Jay-Z story specifically. He's probably my favorite rapper of all time. So the opportunity to interview him sounds like something that it's not the first thing I think about when I would meet Jay-Z, would be interviewing him. But the fact that you're able to do that is pretty cool. So you talk about how all these multi-billionaires are so successful, and yet they're so willing to kind of share their time and their perspective. Obviously, you're a little bit earlier days, but I appreciate you coming on today and sharing some of your time perspective with me. It's really great getting to hear your story. I know we're coming up on time, and I want to give you the last word to tell people where to follow you and everything like that. But really appreciate everything, Nikil, and I have high hopes for what's to come for Alchemy and for you personally.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super, super appreciate it. It's been a blast. And for those of you listening, feel free to reach out. If I can be helpful, I'm happy to help however I can. I'm pretty easy to find. You can, all my socials are the same. So at Nikilster, at Nikilster. That's across Twitter, Instagram. You can have me on there, Facebook also. It's also my website, at Nikilster and .com. It's also my Gmail, nikilster@gmail.com. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.